Hi everyone and welcome to the Newsagent podcast. I'm Susie Lysett, Senior Content Executive at Goodlord, and this episode is a recording of the third in our Renters Reform Bill webinar series, with this particular session on the topic of how the new proposals will be enforced. Paul Shamplina, Chief Commercial Officer at Hamilton Fraser, joined Goodlord's Sherlock to cover everything from the housing court reforms to the new property portal. The free webinar is available on demand and is CPD accredited. I'll include the link in the show notes. But for those that prefer to get your lettings updates on the go, let's crack on with the podcast.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this instalment of the Renters Reform Bill series here at Goodlord. It's a pleasure to host you all. I'm Sherlock, Director of Insurance at Goodlord, and this is the third in our series, talking and discussing different elements of the Renters Reform Bill. It's a pleasure to be joined today by Paul Shamplina. He's going to be introducing himself shortly. Before we get into the real detail of what we're here to discuss, for those of you who are joining who don't know who Goodlord are, we're a pre-tenancy platform business. We help you become more efficient through the entire pre-tenancy process, ensuring compliance virtues are met, expediting the process and allowing you to focus on business generation, exceptional customer service, and driving more revenue streams through different products like rent protection, utilities, and other tenant services. If you want to understand more about how Goodlord can help you, then please do reach out to our website at goodlord.co. You can book a demo. There's a new addition to this list I should add as well in landlord terms of business. We now manage that as part of our standard flow to ensure that your landlord terms of business can get sent out, expedited through the pre-tenancy process and kick that process off. And that's alongside rent collection and indeed letting accounts. So there's been a few additions in recent months that you may not be aware of. By all means, please do reach out if you'd like to understand how we can do those things and support your business moving forwards. Today, though, as all of these webinars are indeed not about Goodlord, it's about the renters reform. And again, it's a pleasure to be joined by my fellow Spurs fan, Mr. Paul Shamplina. Good morning, Paul.
Morning, Ollie. How are you?
I'm not bad at all.
Pleasure to be here.
Yes, indeed. Thank you for joining us. Now, Paul, you're a well-known guy. You may have even seen Paul on the TV, but for those who don't know who you are, just give us a quick intro to Paul Shamplina.
So, yeah, hi, everyone. I've been helping landlords for 30 years. My background was legal, worked in a couple of law firms, was a bailiff and a private investigator, and always dealt with evictions. I set Landlord Action up 22 years ago. Landlord Action, which is part of the Hamilton Fraser Group, is one of the leading landlord and tenant solicitors helping landlords and letting agents with possession cases and evictions. We're busier now than we ever have been. We're up to about, I think, 23 staff now. Really, really busy. And then Landlord Action became part of the Hamilton Fraser family in 2017. I sit on the board of Hamilton Fraser as Chief Commercial Officer, overseeing sales. We own about 10 different brands. So our most well-known brand within the sector is My Deposits, the Property Redress Scheme, Client Money Protect, their free government-backed schemes. We run schemes, obviously, which are mandatory schemes. We also own Total Landlord Insurance. We also own No Deposit Replacement Alternative, HF Assisted Letting Agent Advice and Landlord Action. I also run another one of our companies called landlordsE-BOOK, which is one of the biggest breaking news media sites, and I do a lot of media. As you know, I do the TV program on Channel 5, Nightmare Tenants, Slum Landlords, and loads of letting aid trainings. And anyway, and put boxing events on, as you well know, Ollie.
I think we had a meeting with you earlier this week, and you said that you wear a couple of hats, and I suggested you wear more hats than Boy George. I think there's
that's a really good one.
Yeah. Arguably a busier man in the industry, but a very pertinent person to have on today, because you are somewhat front and center of enforcement within the industry. You're a vocal member of the industry when it comes to change, and indeed you're working with many of the important bodies that actually help inform and change legislation. So I'm really pleased to have you on today, Paul. And for anybody that's joined series before, you know that Paul has joined these at different elements, mostly around the enforcement. So this really hopefully sits very naturally for your sort of skill set and where you spend most of your time, albeit the many hats that you wear. So
I do quite a bit of work with the government, as you know, as well. So I work on I was very heavily involved with the Deregulation Act and helping drafting the Section 21 notice and bringing the squatters law. So I work on quite a lot of working groups now, obviously the Renters Reform Bill as well.
So feel free, those who are joining, to blame Paul for everything if you
don't blame me. Don't blame me.
Let's get into the details. Let's see what we're going to cover today. So we're going to be focused on enforcing the new proposals, which again is why Paul is such a good guest for this. We're going to talk about the court process reforms. We're going to look at the ombudsman covering private landlords. There's been suggested change there, moving into one body. And we're also going to touch on the new property portal. This was a brief line in the white paper, but something that is, I think, and we think is going to gain more and more importance, and actually holds a place within the process that I think could actually add some real benefits. There's not many times that we've looked at the white paper, and so there's huge benefits here. This is one area that I think may. We're going to touch on governmental change as well as part of this webinar too, just given sort of how fluid that's been more recently, and the effect of that on the lettings industry too. So let's get into the first slide around court process. We've got Sarah on the slides as usual. Good morning, Sarah. If we do, I should add before we get into this, if we do have any technical issues, we only had one problem this year so far, touch wood, but we will try and rejoin as quickly as we possibly can. So court process reform. Paul, talk us through what the white paper is suggesting, first of all, when it comes to the Section 8.
So, yeah, I mean, well, talking about Section 8, you've got to backtrack a little bit about Section 21. I mean, obviously, we're going to talk about this. Section 21 is being abolished, we believe, within 2 to 3 years. If it's being abolished, you have to strengthen the grounds of Section 8. I'd say 65% of the work that we do at Landlord Action is Section 8, 35 Section 21. We do the best part of over 2,000 instructions a year for landlords and letting agents. What will happen now? At the moment, there's 17 grounds, Ollie, for Section 8, of which at the moment there's only 2 mandatory grounds, Ground 1 and Ground 8, which is a mandatory ground when there's 2 months rent arrears as of the day you serve notice, as of the day you go to court. And with a Section 8 case, you have to go plead the case and go to court and have a hearing date and have your 5-minute hearing, go before the judge and grant the possession order. Obviously, what happened with COVID, I know we're past COVID and we had webinars on COVID, there was review hearings, everything was slowed up. We still have real challenges with the courts. I have someone that part of their job spec is calling the courts on a daily basis, chasing up hearing dates. We do the best part of 30 to 40 hearings a month. It's quite crazy, really. But what's going to happen is, if you abolish Section 21, which you have to strengthen the grounds of Section 8. Landlords and letting agents have to have faith that they can get their property back. Albeit, what we have seen, and we did a recent poll on Landlord Action, is that 26% of landlords that serve Section 21 notices within the last 12 months did so because they want to sell. And we won't touch on this later on, but landlords selling properties is a big, big threat for letting agents out there. But there's 17 grounds. We think there might be 22 grounds that are going to come in, Ollie, with regard to the working groups and stuff. They're going to bring two other grounds in, which is if a landlord wants to move into the property for him or his immediate family, that should be a mandatory ground. If obviously they want to sell the property, because at the moment landlords use Section 21 for rent arrears, antisocial behaviour, moving back in the property and selling. They're the foremost. And of course, tenants being told to stay put because they want to be rehoused by the council, which is another massive problem. So the grounds need to be strengthened. There needs to be more mandatory grounds. They need to make sure that they have a ground that's strong enough so that landlords can gain possession of a property relating to antisocial behaviour. The beauty of Section 21 is you don't have to give any evidence relating to that. When you have to give evidence on antisocial behaviour, a lot of tenants and neighbours and other people on HMOs are quite fearful because of that individual causing possibly violence or mental health issues.
And so let's touch on the mandatory grounds, especially around family and friends / selling the property. The biggest outcry from the removal of the abolishment of Section 21 was the connotation, I can't get my property back. And indeed, what the government's trying to do here is answer that question to say, well, no, you can on the occasions that we think are deemed it necessary to get your property back. You can't just wake up in the morning and say, I want it back for no absolute reason, which, I've said many times before, I really struggle to see, and the data doesn't show that happens on a large scale. And we're being informed and making legislative change on the lowest common denominator in some respects here, I think. But that aside, in theory, that makes sense. I'm selling my property. I need my property back. In practice, how do you see this working? Because as we're seeing at the moment, the sales cycle is has its own challenges. It can take months. What happens in between time? Are we suggesting that you serve section first, the tenant moves out, and then they go to sell the property? What happens if the property doesn't sell? What happens if the landlord changes their mind the day after and decides to take the property off the market? Has the government and the supporting bodies thought about this in practice?
As far as I'm concerned, no, not really. The devil is in the detail. That's why this can't be rushed through. Bearing in mind, we're going to talk later on about politically, there could be another general election in 2 years' time. But by that time, there's a chance that a lot of this stuff still may not be through because it still needs legislation. It's got to go through Parliament. The devil is in the detail. And that's why, we do a lot of work with the Lettings Industry Council. And you'll talk about the report later on, which we've put together on practicalities. Look, a landlord has to prove they're selling the property. Now, there's going to be landlords out there that will abuse the process. So they will say they're going to sell, but then they decide they're not going to sell. As to what provisions and clauses are going to be put in, we have to wait and see. So it may be that I have a property. Don't forget, there's 95% of tenants out there are absolutely fine, Ollie. They're great. They're okay. And as an agent and as a landlord, a great tenant, you keep as long as possible, staying in the property, no void periods. That's the name of the game. But of course, with tenants, their challenges now is obviously increasing rents across the board, which is happening. So I think that there has to be provisions that have been put in place by maybe a certain amount of time periods, possibly. Proof that, there's a letter from the agent, there's been a letter of instruction. Is it multi-sell? How long has it been on the market? But of course, and we've seen about the stamp duty, concessions and all that. How quickly does it take to sell a property? With Section 20, when it's 2 months, then generally it's about 4 months to get a court order under the accelerated procedure. Are there going to be tenants that are going to be staying in and waiting for there to be a court order? Is it going to be non-fault? There's going to be no rent arrears. There's a whole load of different permutations. And again, like anything, and we've been a bit long in the tooth, Ollie, when it comes to a lot of legislation changes over the years, we have to wait, and it is the devil in the detail. People will think of angles, I'm sure.
And we've got a few questions in from this. Stephen, good morning, Stephen. What happens if you generally want to sell the property, but then it doesn't sell due to lack of demand, etc.? I think that's kind of the point I'm making, Stephen. I'm not suggesting that landlords, on the whole, are going to go out their way to find loopholes in it. I think there's a general lack of detail in the suggestion in the white paper that allows us to take a meaningful understanding of the proposed legislation. And with that in mind, Charlotte makes a good point, Paul. Good morning, Charlotte. Charlotte, at the moment, you have to notify the tenant their property will be sold and market it within 4 months. Then you don't have to serve a notice until you're happy the sale is going through. Would this not be the same? I think it's fair to say that there probably will be a duplication of that process. And in theory, that makes sense. But of course, in practice, what landlords would be doing is ultimately potentially serving section ahead of that to ensure they've got the property back well ahead of time.
There will be, but the problem that one has, and this will be the biggest problem, and your agents, and we've got hundreds of agents online now, is gaining access. Yeah. So, it's great serving a Section 8 notice and saying you want to sell the property, but if your tenant's not going to let you in and makes it clear, that's why when I was working on the Fair Possession Grounds Coalition, it sounded like mafia, but it wasn't right. We were working on grounds. I said that access has to be a ground for a default and a breach of tenancy. It hasn't. At the moment, we've only had ground 12 and it's too generic. Access is a big issue. Not with regard to selling the property, but also with regard to inspections, gas safety, and all that type of stuff. So I think that, and we did a recent survey on for Landlord Action. Over 1,500 landlords entered the survey. Did it about 2 months ago, purely for this reason, like the Section 21. And 45% of landlords out there have experienced problems gaining access. It's really, really high, and it's an issue. And I'm sure a lot of your agents will confirm that.
We see it through our partnerships and services as well, and I think having a mandatory ground in there that ultimately relates to a breach, I think it makes sense to ensure that you can then actually enact the thing we're trying to enact here. Otherwise, you're hitting a brick wall and you're creating barriers. Clearly, that, like you said, the devil is in the detail, and that's not even coming down to the family piece. Like, a member of my family wants to move in. Like, are we talking your brother, your sister, your cousin, your uncle, your aunt? How does it extend? How do you prove it?
I believe it's immediate family. Again, It's moving back in. The problem at a lot of these grounds coming in, and the game has changed, all right? Like I said, I've been acting for landlords for 30 years. I've been a landlord for over 20 years myself, is the government are saying if you're a landlord now, even if you're using a letting agent, which landlords have to use letting agents more than ever to fully manage because it's just a minefield out there, you have to look at this as a business. Even if you've got 1 or 2 properties, it's a business. And a lot of this stuff coming in is about longevity and about long-term, obviously. But what will happen, and this is my prediction, and I don't think you have to be a rocket scientist, Ollie, when there is going to be an end date for Section 21, you will see a massive flurry of Section 21s being piled in, 100%.
And why? So let me just challenge that. Why would we see a huge amount of Section 21s fly in? Just
I'll
because,
tell you why.
Sorry, let me add a caveat. If the reform, there's been a call for evidence what they closed 4 weeks ago. That I hope everybody listening submitted to, and I think from an industry perspective, please watch out for those call for evidence. It's our opportunity as an industry to voice our opinion and give some really meaningful feedback. I mean, the question of whether they listen or not, that's different. But I think the first step is to try and work in partnership with the government to make changes. But there's been a call for evidence. You would hope that that's taken into account. The reform comes in, and you would hope the detail is given. The government should be looking, and they set out in their manifesto on this, to give accelerated powers to landlords where there's a breach and give fairness to both parties. If they deliver on that, why would we see a massive Section 21s flood the market the week before it's closed off?
I'll tell you why. Because, and don't forget, we speak to landlords day in, day out. Okay, at Landlord Action. We are the emergency plumbers for landlords. We're at the end of the game, where they want their property back for 1,001 different reasons. Every landlord has a different story. Is landlords need faith in the court system. Yeah. Now, that supposedly there's been £300 million allocated to the court system from Dominic Raab when he was Justice Secretary. I was on a working group in November 2019 prior to COVID on housing courts. That's been kicked into the long grass. The landlords had Section 21 as their backup, as their easy. There's always a fault. Generally, breaking down, move out, whatever. They called it non-fault, but it was always a fault, right? And there's always a reason, but it's easier. Landlords are fearful going to court and having a hearing date before a judge, okay? Then it's not just Section 21 going. You've got the EPC on the horizon. You've got, obviously, where we're at the moment, you've got interest rate rises, you've got the cost of living. The housing market is still really buoyant because of demand and lack of demand. And I think, obviously, we speak to every agent that's on this webinar. Their biggest issue is they need more property. They've got loads and loads of tenants. They've got a lack of property. They need more landlords. I mean, that's what they want. So I do see that landlords will panic, from knowing landlords. I think if you're a landlord and you're looking this long term, I think agents have to calm landlords down as well. Okay. They might just want to serve it so it's there in the background because you've got a 6-month lifespan. Yeah. And I actually helped bring that law in when I was doing the Deregulation Act and giving evidence stuff. It's just there in the background. Yeah. And I think that I just know it in my gut and had the experience. I just think that there will be a lot of Section 21s that they will ramp up, and I'm sure that
I don't disagree. I just struggle with the logic as to how that benefits the partnership that is a landlord and tenant, and arguably.
It may be something that tips the balance. Landlords think, shall I stick? Shall I twist? There's lots of landlords in that mode at the moment. But actually, you have to remind landlords you're getting more rents than ever before. It's unprecedented. It is actually, being a landlord now is actually a really good business. If you can streamline it, you've got the right professionals, you're able to have a scalable business and, incorporate and all that type of stuff. It can work, but most of them aren't in that position. They're the landlords of 1 to 3s, the 85% of the market.
And Clinton, good morning, Clinton. Make point. None of this considers landlords letting their main residents short term for a set period while they work elsewhere, who should not be considered as running a business. These landlords still make up 30% of our landlords. And I think Clinton's talking about his own business, but 80% of our landlords letting houses rather than flats. I think you're absolutely spot on, Clinton, there, because the legislation, especially moving to periodic, and keeping and retaining the notice periods, especially at the start of that tenancy, mean that is a difficult practice to get right. And I think what you'll see, I would imagine, Paul, is those types of properties really going into Airbnb world rather than the PRS, because ultimately once tenants in there, there's going to be a longer cycle, and it is going to be more difficult, arguably, to if the legislation stays as the white paper suggests, to get the tenants out of the property without going through a court process, right?
Yeah,
so
correct.
Do you think we'll see a rise then within the short-term let space because of this, of property that was in the PRS originally?
I think you will see that. I mean, if you think about what happened with Airbnb, and obviously the government now are really recognising Airbnb and holiday lets. I mean, I remember doing an interview in 2013 with CNN, Richard Quest, saying Airbnb is going to absolutely explode. It came in 2011. Obviously, we get lots of scenarios where there's tenants that are subletting with Airbnb, but generally, a lot of landlords switch to Airbnb. London had the 90-day cycle. Then COVID happened, and then landlords panicked because they had empty properties because people couldn't use Airbnb. Then they came back into the long-term let. What will happen is that they will bring in a lot more taxation with regard to short-term lets. That's on the horizon. It's happened heavily in Scotland with regard to Edinburgh. They've got a massive problem with Airbnb in Edinburgh, and about the amount of PRS that has been taken away. So, but I think that will definitely come into play.
Okay. I've got two more questions. I'm just going to part those. That's Karen and Kamala. We will come back to those shortly, because we talk about the courts process. We talk about then this becoming a more rigid process that would sit in front of the courts. And you've touched on the idea that there's been, some limited investment. We know this space collectively well, Paul. We both operate in this space. I do from a rent protection perspective, and
yes,
we take millions and millions of pounds worth of rent across the UK. The reality of the situation is, we can look at COVID and say, well, that really hampered the process. It created, a backlog. The quarter backlog before COVID. The pressure this is going to put on the courts, because we're going to see more traffic through. And we're going to now, bear in mind, we're going to start to see, if this comes in this way, all of the Section 21s that were used in arrears cases.
Well,
so they all now go through the courts.
Correct.
Is it realistic to think that the court process can actually handle this, let alone, manage it in a mediocre way? Can they actually even handle that kind of surge?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. So I can tell you now, there's been a massive issue way before COVID with regard to recruiting judges and recruiting bailiffs. We'll come on to bailiffs in a minute. But judges' morale was at a real low. I spoke to a judge from Bradford County Court. On average, it takes 15 minutes to do one accelerated possession case, but we don't have a hearing date. When you have hearing dates, there's going to be bigger lists. Okay. As I said, we have advocates and we have courts and all over the country. Some courts are better than others, but obviously the city courts are the worst courts because they have more buy-to-let and more property within their sector. Let me just give you an example here where we talk that, we put a provision for, we said that if the accelerated possession procedure is going to carry for a few years, you should think about putting it online to make it quicker. And we put some proposals forward. But currently at Stratford Housing Court, which is in East London, for example, it takes 75 days for the claim to be considered by the court, which means from service of notice, and will not be considered for about 150 days. With 2 months' notice, in total, it's 180 days. It never used to be as long as that. Yeah.
Gee.
Obviously now there is some good stuff about the court system where you've got possession claims online where you can issue the claim, you get the hearing date straight back. What was a nightmare during COVID, we had review hearings which slowed everything up, and that was just to slow the process up of not having tenants evicted while we didn't have a vaccine, and a massive housing crisis. But all of this is going to come back to the fact that the end game is we've got a massive issue with a shorter housing, and especially a short of social council housing.
And I suppose if we take into account that the majority of Section 21s are used for fault, and those faults are now going to be carried by by Section 8 or other areas of legislation to allow action to be taken, is it fair to assume then, with the lack of investment, and there's no further, the line I think is that investment is suggested, and it's been noted by the government that investment is needed. That's very different to investment actually coming, and that ties into bailiffs as well, because bailiffs are going to be required more often. There's a lack of bailiffs already, So there needs to be double investment, not only in the court, but the entire legal processing of getting somebody out of the property. It's fair to assume then on that basis, Paul, that, the court timelines that we've seen slightly reduced post-COVID, we could start to see to go back towards where we were during COVID, frankly, if we're not.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, this is reality, right? So in 2019, prior to COVID, there was 110,000 possession cases. Okay, 70% of those were made up by the social housing sector. They evict far more than the resi, even though the private rental sector stands at 19%, the social is at 17%, and it's been declining because there's been more of a switch. We've got a massive issue where a lot of tenants were asking to be rehoused by the council, and Section 21 was going to be that mechanism because there was no money order on the Section 21. We did a survey, and about 51% of landlords that did use the Section 21 notice used it for rent arrears. They didn't want to claim for rent arrears, but obviously COVID kicked in, and our debt recovery department's been busier than ever. A lot of landlords were trying to get money orders enforced because they wanted to get county court judgments. That's how you enforce it. What happens is, if you've now going to get rid of Section 21, you're going to have loads more Section 8 cases. You need more judges. You need to have there needs to be a lot more access online. Okay, and we put some provisions forward, employing judges. But the problem is, you've got to realise now where we are today, Ollie, we have the lowest unemployment, lowest jobs, unemployment, people are at work since 1976. It's very hard. I mean, as an organisation, on the board, we're trying to employ people. We've got staff role, really, really difficult. Yeah. A bailiff, on average, is earning £21,000 a year. Now, do you want to be a bailiff? I have been a bailiff, not a county court bailiff. I was a certified bailiff and doing commercial work. Being a bailiff, bearing in mind what has happened 2 days ago, interest rates have gone up. We're all now paying bigger interest rates. It's going to be a bigger squeeze on our mortgages. There's going to be bigger repossessions in house mortgages, not just landlord and tenant. Bailiffs are going to get busier. That's why we say you need to transfer up to the High Court. But do you want to get paid £21,000 a year, knock at a door, get screamed at, get abused at, get violently assaulted? Yeah. It can be a really, really dangerous job. I've been on the front line and whatever, it can be a dangerous job. So they're really struggling to recruit people. And that's why, and the bottom point of your slide here, there has to be bailiff reform. And we put that forward as a proposal as part of the strengthening ground. So if you've got a case, if the rent arrears are severe and they're over 6 months or whatever, automatically the judge should grant leave to transfer up to the High Court, which means you can turn an eviction round the best part of maybe a month, rather than wait. We've been waiting 4.5-5 months for an eviction date in Central London County Court. And those rents are higher in London, obviously, 2, 3, 4 grand a month. And that's another 6 months, another 4 months lost at rent arrears. So they need bailiff reform, Ollie.
Yeah, and it would be remiss at that stage not to talk about one, not to mention, and no pitches here, but the fact that, rent protection insurance, I think, is no brainer, front and centre of agents' minds and landlords' minds. And, I'm very proud of the proposition we put forward. There's many other companies that do it. But I think if you're moving, if you're moving somebody in and you're not talking to landlords around rent protection, you're missing an opportunity for you as business to protect your fees. You're missing an opportunity for landlords to protect their peace of mind and their biggest financial investment. But on that point, I will endorse rent guarantee 100%. This is someone that's been doing evictions, and I do the TV program or whatever. As an agent, you have to protect your landlord. The name of the game is having your landlord for the life of them being a landlord, not just that AST. Yeah. And unfortunately, when things go wrong in a tenancy, couples split up a month 4, the guy loses his job a month 10. The first person they get to blame, unfortunately, is the agent. And you've done your referencing methodically. But if you've got a rent guarantee in place and they're getting their rent every month, your landlords are going to be really, really thankful that they're paying rent guarantee. And actually, it's not a big cost in the grand scheme of things, is it? It's not. And again, I would hammer home the point around the benefit to the letting agent. You're doing more work than ever at that stage and not collecting your fee. And, in the market we're in now,
yes.
I just don't think that's that's going to be acceptable to a lot of businesses. But if you want to know more about that proposition, then please do reach out to us directly. We can talk more about that. I'm going to cover a few questions off before we move on to the next slide, if I may. Karen, good morning, Karen. Could you have a ground for relationships relatively breaking down to cover those times whereby even though agents even through agents. You just can't work with the tenants any further through their unreasonable demands and constant contacting you. I think any agent on the line will probably sympathise with that point, or at least one of their tenants across one of their timelines. Perhaps once mediation has been tried. I think this is kind of the point, right? This is what they're trying to essentially eke out of the process, to say you've really got to have some meaningful grounds in which you are evicting a tenant. And I'm going to tie this, Paul, just before you answer, into another question, which has just come in, I think, from Charlotte. It was, if I can find it. No, sorry, it's Sarah. Good morning, Sarah. If the grounds for taking action in 21 are being moved to Section 8 and elsewhere, it raises the question, why get rid of Section 21? Why not review and reform that existing legislation? So, clearly under Section 21, to the first point, you have every right to serve a section, known as no fault. You can do that because of whatever reason you want. It does beg the question, if we're moving this around, though, and we're trying to sort of fit, round pegs and square holes, why not just ensure that Section 21 is more robust?
Yes.
As opposed to completely scrapping it.
Yeah. I mean, great question. I propose that straightforward. The end of the day, they are thinking, you've got to realise that Shelter are very, very good at campaigning. They're brilliant at campaigning. All right, let's be clear about that. They're a housing organisation, actually, that don't house anyone, but they campaign really well. Let me give you an example from firsthand. There's this myth that landlords are serving Section 21s willy-nilly because they just want the property back. Yeah, I was on Panorama explaining. I was on for 17 seconds, mind you. It was a very tenant-centric thing, saying there's always a reason why you evict a tenant. I think that so they're making it more difficult, essentially, to get your property back. Let's be honest about this, and that the tenants have greater security. I'll give you an example. I gave evidence in 2014 for the Deregulation Act relating specifically to retaliation eviction. So I gave evidence as an expert in front of all these MPs in Parliament. And I have been evicted. I think I issued my first possession claim at Brighton County Court in 1991, Ollie, way before the buy-to-let boom. It shows how old I am. I'd never even heard until that point of retaliation eviction. And that's from me. Mm. We did a survey on Landlord Zone, albeit it was to landlords. So whether they were being honest or not, I don't know. We worked out it was 0.5% of landlords had served a Section 21 notice because tenants had asked for repairs to be carried out. When I gave evidence, Shelter said that they worked out that, so what they do is they work out and they do their surveys, and it is arguable, and I've had an argument with them or debate with them. Well, when they do their survey, I think they do their survey for people on their advice line. So tenants that are having issues. And they might have done a survey for 1,000 people, and then they equate it to how many tenants there are in the country. And they said that there was 213,000 Section 21 notices that had been served because the tenants have complained to the landlords, and the landlords in retaliation serve the notices. Now, I don't know, but most of the time I know that landlords did never ever give a reason why they serve a Section 21 notice. But because they campaigned on it, and that's why that came forward as part of the law. And I'm just giving an example how things come through.
I think the positioning in the last 3 or 4 years, especially for me, has been really, really helpful. And I think, Shelter have come out more recently with a campaign that essentially targeted letting agents, which I find absolutely mind-boggling. Target the conduit for the professionalism in the sector and ridicule them is not going to get you very far. I think, actually coming together and working together and having open debate about what is the best customer outcome, i.e. customers being landlords and tenants, is far more proactive. It does feel, though, lines have been drawn. There's a level of self-interest now because, Shelter have made the position very clear. They're clear on what they're campaigning for, and that is it. And it's pretty rigid. And I fear that's a poor way to go for the sector, because actually working in combination with these guys, and I don't see a downfall to that. I think that would be a positive.
But there's no engagement. I mean, I will meet with industry heads, and we've had this, especially with Teresa Wallace at the lettings industry, and loads of different organisations that they don't really engage. We've had a little bit of engagement with Generation Rent, And that's the mantra, really. Attacking letting agents, I thought that was a little bit like below the belt. Look, I know better than anyone. I represent the Property Redress Scheme. We've got 17,000 members. Client Money Protect, 4,500 members. My Deposit, 3,500. So anyone knows letting agents is us. As a whole, and we know agents are decent. I've exposed dodgy letting agents on my TV program that have stolen rents and all that. They're few and far between. But part of the problem is they don't engage, and that's the problem. Ollie.
And Ian asked a question. Good morning, Ian. He says, I believe the housing associations, which are registered charities, are not playing their part in providing homes for low-income people. What measures does Paul think the PRS should be taking to ensure they are playing their part? And I think that's a great question. I'm going to add one on top of that to you, Paul. Should the PRS play their part? Is there a necessity to do that? What's your views on that?
Well, look, it's been forced to play its part because we have a housing shortage. You've got London boroughs. I'm in London. I'm in London Borough Barnet, but you've got London boroughs. There's 33 boroughs in London. There's London boroughs that have got 35,000 people on their waiting list for a council property. It takes 20 to 25 years on average to get a council property. Where are these people going to be housed? They come into the private rental sector. Landlords help, and it's a great thing helping a benefit tenant on lower income. And actually statistically, a housing benefit tenant will stay longer and look after a property better. That's a fact. There is a myth. The problem, the struggles they have, you've got universal credit, which is broken down. You've got the worst law that ever came into effect in 2008 that was brought in by the previous Labour government, where they wanted to empower tenants to make direct payments to tenants that couldn't afford or couldn't manage their property, their money. And now the problem you've got is that rents are at a sky high. Average rent in London is £2,000 a month. So, Ollie, I'm going to come to you. You live in Lincoln. You've got a nice 2-bed flat, right? Tenant demand has gone through the roof, and your agents will tell you that. You've got 10 tenants vying for a property, biggest demand ever. You can now pick the best 3 tenants out of those 10. Yeah? Yeah, and if you've got a good agent, they're pre-qualified, and then you'll use vouch and you do the referencing, all that type of stuff. I'm a housing benefit family. Me and my wife and my 2 kids, I come to you. My LHA rate's fixed at X amount. But, against me, I've got a private couple. They work at, one works in London, and they're going to pay 450 quid a month more, 300 quid a month more. Who are you going to go for? That is going to be the biggest problem. The biggest issue as well, so I'm going on a bit of a rant, but the biggest issue as well is when Section 21 is abolished, the more vulnerable tenants will be the losers, because you're going to have much more stringent referencing. You're going to have landlords that are going to be demanding that they have guarantors in place. A lot of everything that's made out, that we're guys on the ground. We know what's going to happen. We deal with tenants. We deal with issues day in, day out. And we try and engage with civil servants. I've had loads of civil servants coming to our offices on various different working groups now, and we explain stuff. But there's the longer term problem. And of course, now the problem we've got is landlords are selling up. So I'm a decent tenant. Ollie, you've had enough. You've got 2 properties. You think, you know what? I'm scared. I think there's going to be a recession. Interest rates going up. I've done all right. I want to cash my chips in. Yeah, my biggest issue is tax. I'm going to serve notice on my tenant, right? I want to get my property back to sell. My tenant, me, the tenant, I've been your tenant for 9 years, has been as good as gold. So now what's going to happen is you're going to have really good tenants that are now going to have to leave the property. You didn't put the rent up properly for over the 9 years. Now, all of a sudden, I've got to look for something else, and I can just barely afford a two-bedroom flat on the outskirts or somewhere else out of Lincoln. And then there's the cost of the move. So there's practicalities that people don't think about, especially civil servants.
Yeah, I think the economic pressures that are backing that, and what seems to be a trickle-down economic landscape from the new conservative government. I think my estimation is that clearly affects the more vulnerable in our sector and across the country, which ultimately, like you say, that landlords will have choice, and if the government is asking a landlord to run their management of property like a business, well, guess what they're going to do? They're going to make informed commercial decisions, and that 100%. Means, I think, following the way that you're going. So I think there's a real fear there, and for me, there's one stock answer to all of this, and that's ultimately house building. I actually think the PRS has propped up a housing crisis nearly for 20 years, frankly, for as long as I've been in the industry, because, we've edged away at different areas and different parts of the sector to actually spread ourselves so thinly without, a large proportion of new homes being built. Those chickens are coming home to roost at the moment. So I'm going to be interested to see where the government's stance on home building is moving forwards. Because frankly, it needs to be meaningful. You talked earlier about your involvement in the PRS and other bodies. And let's move on to the next slide, if we can, please, Sarah. The session in the white paper is that there's going to be one ombudsman to cover all. That's what it's saying.
Yes.
Just talk us through where we are now from a ombudsman perspective.
Well, so at the moment, it's still in consultation stage. Ideally, there's talk about one ombudsman, one port of call, okay, where every landlord will have to be part of a redress scheme, exactly like your agents. They either belong to us, the property redress scheme, or the property ombudsman, okay? And actually, if the complaints procedure is not dealt with, and quite rightly, all your agents will say, well, surely self-managed landlords, all landlords should be part of a scheme like us, because the tenant is your customer and the tenant has a right to make a complaint. What they're saying is that there should be, and obviously we run, the schemes at PRS and My Deposits, is where's the single place of ombudsman? History tells us, like the legal ombudsman and some other type of ombudsman, when the government tried to do it, it doesn't really work and it hasn't really been a success. So we need to wait and see. Sean Hooker, I know, who's listening to this webinar at the moment, and Tim Fromar, the managing director of PRS, they're in talks and we're regularly engaging. And as you know, we do mediation, and we've done the mediation pilot with the NRLA on landlord redress. We've got over 5,000 landlords that have signed up to this voluntary scheme for landlord redress. We're feeding it back all back to the government. But you've got to realise the NRLA landlords are the decent landlords. They're the landlords that are compliant. They want to run their business properly. And so we've got 2.4 million landlords out there. There's a lot of landlords. There's a lot of landlords that need to know about the redress scheme when it comes in. How do they sign up? What's going to happen? But I think most of the complaints that we've got to deal with, and you've got to realise, the property redress scheme dealt with about 1,600 complaints of agents last year. We're talking about, if obviously we're part of the scheme, or however, there's 2.3 million landlords out. There's going to be a lot more complaints about landlords. There's going to be complaints. Some of it may be deposit related, so that's something separate. But they haven't carried out a gas safety. They haven't. They haven't carried out repairs to the property. That will be an issue. There's a whole load of type of complaint. So it's going to come in property redress, and it can only raise standards. So I'm all for it, really. Whether tenants will try and abuse the process to try and hold up, not pay the rent, me being Mr. Cynical, we'll wait and see. But we're very much at the heart of landlord redress, and we're consulting with the government, and we set up a pilot scheme. We're the only pilot scheme that's set up with the NRLA.
And excuse my typo on this slide. That doesn't read at all how I had it in my head. The benefit being having that makes no sense. So I'll rephrase it. So what I meant to ask there is what is the benefit of having one central body, and how would that affect letting agents, landlords, and tenants?
Well, I think what will happen is we have to wait and see, because is it, obviously Rent Smart Wales have got it in Scotland, have got a register and so forth. Is they're saying there's one place to go to. The problem the thing I've had a problem in the past with, especially working with government, is they don't do that. They rely on us in the industry to promote it. Okay, that's fine, but they don't do any real big heavy lifting themselves. We talk about advertising campaigns, and because the problem is there's so many landlords out there that are doing it themselves. Okay, we're still getting landlords that call up Landlord Action and Advice line, and more importantly, My Deposits customer service line, saying they haven't put the deposit in the deposit scheme. Right now, the law came in, and was it the 6th of April, 2007? Right, so only 15 years ago, landlords are still not putting deposits in the deposit scheme. Right, which is crazy. And actually, that was the best bit of legislation that did come in, because there was too many complaints. Yeah. But there being a single port of contact is the main theme. again, we wait to see the devil in the detail. There's more consultations that are going on, and I would encourage your people that have tuned in today to go in and follow Sean Hooker, because he writes regular blogs about engagement with government and where it's steering towards.
Yeah, indeed. Sean's joined us a few times in the past for different webinars, and will join us again, I think, as and when we understand more about ROPA, and that's definitely a different conversation. Yeah. In terms of the white paper, the unifying of an ombudsman, and trying to get one central place to pull all of these kind of escalations into, it's evident to me throughout the entire white paper, actually, not just on this point, that the note or mention around letting agents is minimal to non-existent. Yeah. A question from me in place of one of our listeners. Why is that? Why does the government seem to not acknowledge the important role that working professionals that understand law and legislation can provide? And do you think that regulation is a step towards allowing the industry to take more of an important role and shaping how the sector actually works?
Yeah, great question. Look, letting agents are essential. If they want the industry to be more professionalised, which is where they want it to go, and they want tenants to have greater security. And tenants on average now, and this is a bit out of date from maybe a year ago, are paying 31% of their wages towards their rent. The issue now is that's going to go up, obviously, with the cost of living crisis and stuff like that. So having agents understanding law, understanding complexities and property management is absolutely essential. I was disappointed. I think ROPA was on the radar. It was talked about, and then it went off a cliff, 6 to 12 months ago. Maybe they thought bringing ROPA in the same time as the Renters Reform Bill, it's too much too early, and they've stagnated it. Having letting agent training is essential. We do letting agent training here at Hamilton Fraser. So I think for the good guys want letting agent training. They want regulation. It makes sense. It also gets rid of a lot of the cowboys in the industry that cut corners, which is important. So we wait and see. And then, of course, there's periphery stuff. There's property investment training. There's rent to rent. I'm right at the heart of rent to rent and making sure that that's made more regulated and cleaned up. We wait to see. But I was disappointed that they pushed ROPA back, Ollie, to be honest. But we wait for that to rise its head again, please, God.
I just think it makes no sense when you've got, circa 12, 13,000, independent companies that specialise, of which the vast majority are excellent at what they do, just completely ignore the fact that they exist. And we're clearly a big champion for letting agents. That's not because there's solely a commercial aim. We work with letting agents. It's because, goodness me, this needs a professional. This isn't a job you can just roll up to and think, I'm going to be a landlord tomorrow and I'm going to be okay, because there's some really bad implications of getting it wrong. And I don't know.
An example of that, Ollie, it's good that you mentioned that. I do loads and loads of property. I do loads of, I'm doing letting agent training for an agent in Leicester tomorrow, and then one in East London on Friday. I do loads of training all the time. And then you get the property networking training groups as well. So you get individuals that just turn up, and then they see courses on rent to rent, and they want to get into property. And if you want to get into property and you want to build a portfolio, the reality is you need money. As to how much is arguable, right? But you need money, right, to buy property. And a lot of these people, they go into these rent to rent courses, and it does wind me up. And I've written some content on the PRS website and some guides and stuff. And then they end up going into property management. And I'll take your property on. It's a 4-bedroom property in Lincoln. You've had a bad experience with agents. You won't have any void periods. I'll pay you 1,200 quid a month, but I'm going to rent it and get a £2,000 a month. Easy peasy. But managing property, and your guys out there, is the hardest thing to do in property. I don't care what anyone says, right? You're dealing with conflicts. You've got to understand people. It's a very people business. You've got to understand compliance. You've got to deal with HMO laws, all that type of stuff. And a lot of the time it goes wrong, or they can't pay the landlord and whatever. And that's why letting agents are the core and the backbone to our industry, of course. Agreed.
I'm conscious of time. We've got a couple of questions coming, one from Robert and one from somebody who didn't leave their name, unfortunately, but good morning to both of you. Both along the same line, essentially, that if the landlord is having their property fully managed by an agency, will they still need to be a member themselves of an ombudsman?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, they still need to be a member 100% because they're taking rents in and they're managing. So the laws are with regard to redress. If you're taking deposits, taking money, and you're managing a property, yes, you have to be part of a redress scheme. Period. All right. Now the argument is, and I thought, well, if a landlord is coming to you, they won't need to be part of a redress scheme. But I've been corrected to say that actually your landlord still needs to be part of a redress scheme, even if he's using you for full management. Now, what the cost is, it could be 20 quid, it could be 50 quid or whatever. And then, of course, and maybe we're going to talk about this on the next slide, there is going to be landlord registration. My argument is landlord redress is landlord registration. And we can talk about that in further detail. You're just doubling up. You know, you have rent smart wells, right? And I think if I remember rightly, you know, all landlords that are self-managing have to go on a course, have to get a qualification. You know, if they're self-managing, if they use an agent, not sure they have to join. Correct me if I'm wrong. And in Scotland, I remember when they brought in landlord registration years and years ago. I'm talking about 2010, 2012. And I remember doing a talk in Fife to about 200 landlords. And I thought, you know what, it was a bit spiky, the crowd, but I like a little bit of a challenge. So I said, how's this landlord registration going? I almost got lynched. But anyway, and of course, cynically, of course, the government want information. They want data, you know, as well.
And let's talk about that. Let's talk about data, because that's ultimately where the new property pool is heading. And this was the briefest of brief lines in the white paper. Yeah. And I think, you know, from a tech background, a Goodlord, we really appreciate how hard it is to provide something that really, really works, and not only provide it but maintain it, and continue to invest in it. It's just necessary. So the idea that sits either with local authorities or the government, dare I say it, a third party, which I think nobody's going to be a fan of. You know, that's problematic in itself, I think, because there's a level of investment. But let's talk about what she's setting out here. You know, as much as we know at the moment. The suggestion here, Paul, is the portal will be used essentially as a stepping stone to the property logbook almost that was mooted, you know, a year or two ago. Talk us through what they're suggesting.
So look, every property has a UPRN number, a unique number, right? So I'm totally for this. Makes total sense. It will make letting agents' lives so much easier. Okay. And of course, help with regard to sales purchases and purchase and sales and stuff to know what information is linked to that property. So deposit and deposit scheme, MEES, electrical, you know, gas safety, you know, all that type of stuff, land registry. Yes, of course, it's going to be information relating to that property. My challenge is, and look, you know, Ollie, you're at one of the leading tech companies in the property industry, all right? And you know about tech, you know about portals. We're talking about, 4.4 million dwellings? Yeah, is that fair enough to say? That have to go on a portal. Who's going to manage it? Is it going to be government-based? It's not going to be a third party. Again, no one knows the detail. But, you know, being able to see, you know, a tenant, if they're going on a viewing, you know, it's like you go back to, you know, the rogue landlord, the rogue letting agent register. For some reason, when they brought this in, and I was sitting on that consultation, they thought for their wisdom that only councils could gain access, which made no sense whatsoever. So landlords, tenants, letting agents, various parties can get access. This is obviously when it's set up and how long it's going to set up, and it could cost absolute fortune, million, whatever it may be, is they get access to see that property is compliant. And then, of course, you know, if I sit with my lettings industry council hat on, we said, well, if you've got all this, why do you need HMO licensing? Yeah, because that's been a bane in landlords' life. They're paying loads of money. The good landlords end up paying 500 quid for 3 years, and it's a bit of a cash cow for for the landlords, for the councils. And how's that enforced? So there is an argument, and we've said for the Lettings Industry Council, well, if you do this and do this properly, and we've done a whole load of work on this way before the announcement, is, well, why do you need HMO licensing? You know, because every council's different. There's all different laws. The regulation and the enforcement are different. So, in principle, this looks brilliant. And the whole emphasis of this is to make sure that that at the moment there's 21% of properties in the private rental sector fall below the decent home standard, Ollie. Okay, they want to halve that, and this is a big step towards halving that.
I think this in theory is a really good idea, and I'm very supportive of the TLIC, the Letting Industry Council, Paul, who are members of the suggestion of moving forwards into that property logbook, where actually you start to take all other things into account. There was a 10 years ago, there's an insurance claim on this,
Yes.
a gas issue in this, or the windows got replaced at this year. Like, having that as a logbook across time,
a bit like with your car. When you have an MOT
exactly
in your
right.
car.
Exactly. I think that's super, super helpful for letting agents, for landlords, and for tenants. I see real benefit in it. I think the management of that, though, is important. And, if we're talking about sort of local authorities sort of managing this, then I think that's problematic, both from a funding perspective and a management perspective. I struggle to get comfy that a commercial body could manage this. The pooling of data across every single avenue would be massive. So it does feel like something, I suppose, Paul, that the government would manage as a centralised database, no different to DVLA, for example, or indeed the way that they manage passport control. And
it's a big job, Ollie. Big job.
So, this was a very small part of the white paper. And if you go through the white paper, and this is remember, foregoing lifetime deposits, that was part of the original manifesto that has been completely wiped out, or almost.
But don't forget, Labour made an announcement yesterday. We might want to touch on, obviously.
I think it's worth. Let's do that, Paul.
Yeah. So, Ollie, they said that portable deposits should be back on the table. They say pets should be mandatory. Lisa Nandy, who's the shadow housing minister, she said council properties, council homes. Yes, great in theory. How many times we heard that over the course of different parties that have in Parliament? We need to build 300,000 properties, all that type of stuff. The money's got to be paid for. But takeaways from the conference was they want there to be a 4-month notice period. Okay, they want tenancies to be periodic. We haven't even touched on that, and maybe that's another conversation for another day. There has been a U-turn in Wales, by the way, where they wanted periodic. They're going back to fixed term. It's a big worry. It's a big worry with regard to renewals, with regard to guarantors and stuff like that. With regard more detail and antisocial behaviour, there needs to be much more pre-action. Look, the reality is that they want the procedure to be slowed down. And then of course the big elephant in the room that comes back in for landlords is rent caps. Is that going to be back on the agenda? So we have to wait and see. But obviously you're looking at elections that's going to happen in 2 years. The government have just made, Eddie Hughes, the other housing secretary, he was very, very heavily involved in the white paper, leading on working groups and as such. He's now gone. There's been a replacement by Nick Clark. It's still going to happen. They're still going to enforce it. It's going to take time. They've got new people in cabinets and so forth, and getting used to grounds. The civil servants still stay the same, and they are engaged. The civil servants are engaging. I'm speaking to them. Other people speaking to them. But we have to wait and see. But this has to be legislation. There was a 12-point plan. Some of the stuff might fall on the wayside. We wait and see. I think the biggest challenges I look at is, the abolishment of Section 21. I would say that, but how that's enforced, how the grounds of the strength of the Section 8, is there going to be faith with landlords in the court system? They get their property back. And periodic tenancies. The big worry is obviously student landlords, because purpose-built blocks have exemptions. Why aren't they going to give that to landlords that are renting in the student market? I read a story about a student that couldn't find any student housing where he wanted to live. And the big threat to all of this, unfortunately, is landlords exiting. The small landlords are exiting, but there is some hope. The big institute. I was with an institutional fund last week, on a really big fund. They're piling back in. There's loads of big funds that are really scaling up, and they are buying. And one stat I will give you, Ollie, before we switch off, and this is a really telling fact, actually, and this came from Hamptons. In 2022, 41% of landlord-owned properties were bought by other landlords. 59% of the landlord-owned proproperties were sold to non-landlords. Yeah? So there's a telling part in that.
We discussed this yesterday, didn't we, Paul? And I was discussing this back and forth with our CEO, William Reeve, and we're then looking at the ONS stats in terms of home ownership, home building, etc. The numbers don't quite align by quite some stretch. So it's the next question on from that, which is really interesting, is to say, okay, if that 59% then who are non-landlords bought them, who are they? Because you look at the growth in home ownership, it's a murky picture. So it's, I completely buy the fact that there will be some landlords leaving the market. I just not. I think it's unhelpful to be on the bound and saying there's mass exoduses, because there's a lot. Nearly half, 41% of properties are going to another landlord anyway. So that's one proportion we know for sure about. But I think there's a lot more data cleansing to be done here to ensure that we're painting a good picture of what that market change looks like. And I'm going to finish on one question, if I may, Paul. I appreciate, guys, we're out of time, so thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure.
Hundreds and hundreds of lettings professionals today. So really appreciate you taking your Wednesday morning out to join me and Paul. But Karen asks, with 51% of landlords already let only, and the government portal purporting to give clear information on how to let and all the prescribed information online, it's possible that they will feel letting agents will not be needed. How can we demonstrate to the government in lobbying groups that letting agents are essential? I think the role of a letting agent is changing and has changed. And I think, where the likes of Rightmove and Zoopla have been fantastic in sort of getting properties out to a bigger mass, they've also taken away some of the nuanced part of being a letting agent, and the game has changed slightly in my view. So looking at see how you can consult with landlords and look at long-term business relationships, for 100%. Me, is the way forward.
Yeah,
it's that consultative approach. And the reason I note that question there, Karen, is we're running a free future-proofing consultation process with all of our customers and non-customers to look at where you are as a business, understanding the reform coming down the tracks and the methods and processes you can go through to help protect your business and grow your business. So if that's of interest, please do reach out to us. We'd love to help. You don't have to be a Goodlord customer. We're not going to sell you Goodlord. That isn't the point of it. We are invested in the industry, and as is Paul. So Paul, you're running one-to-one consultations with members as well, aren't you?
Yeah, but when I get time, that's my biggest challenge. So like tomorrow, I'm in Leicester with a company called Knightsbridge, and then I'm with Elliot Lee on Friday. So I go in. I'm getting booked to do. You get a lot of agents that are now putting landlord events on. How to be professional landlords, about the positivity of biotech. But then I do a lot of. I go into agents. I do some outbounding. I look at how they pitch. I understand landlords. There's still a detachment of how letting agents see what landlords are and what type of talk and how they feel. So I do how to attract more landlords to your business and how to upsell from let only to full management. There is an art to it. At the end of the day, letting agents now are compliance officers. Landlords want peace of mind. Landlords now have to put a price on their time. But I've got my website is paulshamplina.tv. If anyone's interested, they can contact me. But it's obviously when I get some time and I can book something in the diary.
Indeed, and today especially, thank you for making the time, Paul, to join us and everyone else joining the call. We're going to send the recording out, so if you miss part of this, then please watch out in your inbox. I've also got a question around the previous elements in this series. They are available to download. If you can't access those to our website, please do just drop us an email. We can send you the recordings of those. We're also going to send out the Lettings Industry Council answer to the white paper that was released yesterday. Paul's been working very closely on that. I myself joined the quarterly meetings of the TLC. It's a really good body that try and take a fair and balanced view on what's happening in the industry and try and help shape that as best as possible. And we think that will be really helpful for you guys to have access to and read through. So we'll attach that to the sending of the recording as well. But for now, Paul, thank you so much for your time. Everybody joining, thank you. Have a fantastic Wednesday, whatever you're doing, and keep calm and carry on letting. We'll see you all 100%. Soon. Take care.
Have a great work. Take care, guys. Bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.